The glass of synth whiskey sat on the scarred metal table, amber liquid trembling in rhythm with the hand that held it. Jace stared at the vibration. It was a subtle thing, a microscopic twitch in his nerve endings that no amount of medical gel or deep sleep therapy had managed to scrub away. The tremor was his souvenir from the colony wars, a permanent reminder of the trigger pull he had hesitated on, and the massacre that had followed because of it. He sat alone in the darkest corner of the gravity well, a dive bar clinging to the outer ring of Station K7 like a barnacle on a dying whale. Outside the thick, scratched viewport, the jagged remains of a moon drifted by, silently rotating in the void. It had been cracked in half during the last great bombardments, a celestial corpse that no one had bothered to clean up. Jace downed the drink. It tasted like iodine and burnt sugar. He grimaced, slamming the glass down a little harder than necessary. Another round, he muttered to the air. The automated bartender, a rusted arm descending from the ceiling, whirred and poured a precise 2 ounces. Jace rubbed his face. The skin there felt rough, like old leather. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, cutting through the stubble. It pulled slightly when he frowned, which was most of the time. His routine was a loop of gray monotony designed to keep the ghosts at bay. Wake up in a closet-sized hab unit that smelled of recycled ozone. Drink simulated coffee. Report to the security depot. Walk the perimeter. Fix the surveillance drones that were older than he was. Drink. Sleep. Repeat. It was a purgatory he had chosen, far away from the core worlds and the military parades that made him sick to his stomach. Jace stood up, tossing a few credit chits onto the table. It was time for his shift. He walked through the station corridors, his magnetic boots clicking rhythmically against the deck plates. The station was a neutral zone, a hub for freighters, smugglers, and desperate people trying to disappear. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting long, twitching shadows. "Hey, Jace," a voice crackled over his earpiece. It was Garrison, the station AI. "You have a drone down in Sector 4. Thermal regulators are shot again." "Copy that," Jace said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I am on it." He met up with Vorn in the maintenance bay. Vorn was a Varaxian, a 4-armed mechanic with skin like wet clay and a penchant for chewing on metal bolts. "You look like death warmed over," Vorn said, not looking up from the engine casing he was welding. "I feel worse." Jace deadpanned. "The drone?" "Over there." Vorn pointed with a lower arm. "I think a rat lizard chewed through the power coupling. Or maybe it just gave up on life. I would not blame it." Jace knelt by the drone, popping the chassis. As he worked, twisting wires and bypassing blown fuses, the holographic news feed mounted on the wall blared the daily cycle of bad news. "Unrest continues in the rim sectors," the perfectly coiffed anchor reported. "Several trade guilds have reported sabotage on their supply lines. The Imperial Palace denies rumors of a mobilized fleet, though sources suggest the Council of Houses is meeting in emergency session following the sudden death of Duke Harlan in a shuttle malfunction." "Accidents," Jace muttered, stripping a wire with his teeth. "They are always accidents when a noble gets too loud." "It is going to blow," Vorn said, lifting his welding mask. "The whole Empire. You can feel it. The pressure is too high." "Let it blow," Jace said. "As long as the blast radius does not hit this station." But the blast radius was coming to them. 2 hours later, the docking clamps of the station groaned under the weight of a massive vessel. It was a diplomatic cruiser, sleek and silver, shaped like a teardrop falling through the stars. The hull was etched with the intricate filigree of House Valoran, one of the founding families of the Galactic Dynasty. Jace stood on the observation deck, watching the spectacle. Red carpets were rolled out, actual fabric, not holograms, and a phalanx of station administrators stood sweating in their dress uniforms. The airlock hissed open. A squad of royal guards marched out first, their armor polished to a mirror sheen, pulse pikes held at perfect angles. They looked impressive, but Jace noted the way they scanned the room. They were looking at the crowd, not the corners. Amateurs. Then she stepped out, Princess Lyria. She was tall, holding herself with a rigidity that suggested a steel spine. Her skin was a pale violet, marked with shimmering silver patterns that denoted her lineage, swirling down her neck and vanishing beneath the high collar of her dress. The dress itself was a masterpiece of bioengineering. The fabric living petals of bioluminescent flora that shifted color from deep indigo to soft pearl as she moved. Her eyes were luminous, glowing with a soft inner light. But as Jace watched the feed on his security tablet, he saw something else. She was not looking at the dignitaries. She was not looking at the Boeing station commander. She was looking past them, at the grimy bulkheads and the flickering lights, with an expression of profound exhaustion. She looked like a bird of paradise trapped in a cage made of gold and polite conversation. Surrounded by stiff courtiers who whispered into their cuffs and humorless guards who shoved dock workers aside, Lyria descended the ramp. She waved, a practiced minimal motion. Jace snorted, turning away from the railing. Just another tour, he said to himself. Smile, wave, ignore the rot. Inside the lavish guest quarters on the upper ring, Lyria dismissed her attendants with a sharp gesture. The moment the heavy doors sealed, she slumped. The regal posture vanished. She ripped the heavy jeweled headpiece from her hair and threw it onto the velvet sofa. She walked to the window, staring out at the debris field of the broken moon. Her reflection in the glass was a stranger to her, a symbol, a bargaining chip, a pretty face to put on recruitment poster. "I hate this," she whispered to the empty room. She activated her personal terminal, but instead of reviewing her schedule of banquets and speeches, she pulled up a secure channel. Grainy footage from the border conflicts filled the screen, burning cities, refugees huddled in cargo containers, the banners of her father's house flying over smoking ruins. Her father, the emperor, called it pacification. She called it a slaughter, but what could she do? She was the diplomat, the softener of blows, the distraction. She needed to breathe. Real air, not this perfumed, scrubbed atmosphere they pumped into the VIP suites. Lyria went to her wardrobe and pulled out a simple gray traveler's cloak she had bought in secret years ago. She wrapped it around herself, pulling the hood low to hide her silver markings and glowing eyes. She keyed the service override on her door, a trick she had learned from a rebellious cousin, and slipped out into the corridor, heading for the service lifts. She wanted to see the station, the real station. Down in the lower decks, the air was thick with humidity and the smell of frying grease. Jace was finishing his patrol, walking with his hands in his pockets, thinking about the bottle of whiskey waiting for him in his quarters. He turned a sharp corner around a massive heat exchanger and slammed directly into a small, cloaked figure. The impact knocked the breath out of him. The figure stumbled back, hitting the bulkhead with a thud. The hood slipped back, revealing a flash of violet skin and wide, luminous eyes before being yanked forward again. "Watch where you are going," Jace growled, steadying himself. "You watch where you are going." The figure snapped back. Her voice was melodic but sharp as a whip. "You were walking in the center of the lane." "I was walking where I wanted," Jace said, brushing dust off his tactical vest. "This is a maintenance deck, not a promenade for tourists who got lost looking for the gift shop." "I am not a tourist," she hissed, stepping forward. And you look like you slept in a garbage compactor. Is this how station security presents itself? Jace blinked. The insult was so precise, so haughty, it actually made him pause. He looked at her closely. Under the hood, he caught a glimpse of her face. High cheekbones, eyes that seemed to hum with energy, and a mouth set in a stubborn line. She was beautiful, undeniably, but she looked tired. There was a shadow in those glowing eyes that he recognized. It was the same shadow he saw in the mirror every morning. "And you," Jace said, his voice dropping an octave, "look like someone running away from something." Lyria stiffened. For a second, she thought he knew. She looked at his face, the brutal scar, the eyes that were cold and flat like polished stones. He was terrifying in a way, a weapon that had been left out in the rain to rust. But he was also seeing her, not the dress, not the title, her. "I am not running," she lied, pulling the cloak tighter. "I am exploring." "Explore somewhere else," Jace said, stepping around her. "The lower decks eat people like you for breakfast. Go back upstairs, princess." He used the word as a generic insult, but he saw her flinch. Jace walked away, not looking back. Lyria watched him go, her heart hammering. He was rude, abrasive, and smelled of cheap alcohol. He was the most interesting person she had met in 3 weeks. Jace continued his patrol, the encounter rattling him more than he wanted to admit. He needed to clear his head. He took a shortcut through Cargo Bay 4, a cavernous space filled with shipping containers stacked like bricks. He was halfway across the catwalk when he heard voices. He stopped. The bay was supposed to be empty for maintenance. Jace crouched, moving silently to the edge of the grating. Below, in the shadows between 2 massive containers, 2 men were talking. They wore the jumpsuits of dock workers, but their posture was wrong. Too straight, too alert. "The schedule has shifted," one man said. His voice was low, professional. "The target will be at the reception in 2 hours. "The extraction team is in place?" the second man asked. "Yes. Once the bloodline is purged, the chaos will cover our exit. The client wants it done tonight. No mistakes." Purging the bloodline. Jace felt a cold spike in his gut. That was not smuggler talk. That was a hit. He waited until they moved off, then scrambled back to the lift. He keyed his comms. "Control, this is Jace. I need to speak to Supervisor Marek." Now. Marek was a heavy-set man who spent most of his shift playing strategy games on his datapad. He did not look up when Jace burst into the security office. "What is it, Jace?" "I am in the middle of a raid here." "I heard something in Bay 4, Jace said, leaning over the desk. 2 men discussing a hit. They used the phrase purging the bloodline. Marek sighed, pausing his game. He looked at Jace with pitying eyes. He looked at the slight tremor in Jace's hand. "Jace," Marek said softly. "We scanned Bay 4 10 minutes ago. It is empty." "I know what I heard," Jace snapped. "They were professionals. They mentioned the reception. The princess is the target." Marek chuckled, shaking his head. "Listen to yourself. You see shadows everywhere. It is the stress. Jace, or maybe the bottle. Look, go take a nap. Sleep it off. If I call in a red alert because you heard a ghost, we both lose our jobs." Jace stared at him. The urge to grab Marek by the collar was overwhelming, but he knew that look. It was the same look everyone gave him when he talked about the war. The look that said broken things should stay quiet. "Fine," Jace said, his voice tight. "I will go." He walked out, but he did not go to his quarters. He went to his locker, pulled out his old kinetic pistol, a heavy, illegal piece of hardware he had kept from the service, and tucked it into the back of his waistband. Then, he headed for the upper decks. If no one else was going to watch the door, he would. The grand ballroom of Station K7 had been transformed. Holographic chandeliers floated in the air, dripping crystals of hard light. The elite of the sector were there, draped in silks and synthetic furs, holding flutes of sparkling wine. Lyria stood on a raised dais, flanked by her guards. She was back in the bio dress, her face painted in the ceremonial style, her expression a mask of serene boredom. She nodded at the appropriate times, smiled when the local governor made a bad joke, and wished she were anywhere else. She scanned the room, her eyes drifting over the crowd, near the back, standing in the shadow of a decorative pillar. She saw him, the scarred man from the lower decks. He was wearing a dress uniform jacket that was clearly stolen or bought second-hand. It was too tight across the shoulders and missing a button. He was not drinking. His eyes were moving constantly, scanning faces, hands, exits. He came, she thought, a strange warmth blooming in her chest. The entertainment for the evening began. A troupe of acrobats from the low-gravity worlds bounded into the center of the room. They spun and twisted in the air, their movements fluid and impossible. The crowd applauded politely. One performer, wearing a mask of mirrored glass, separated from the group. He tumbled toward the dais, a blur of motion. Jace straightened up. Something was wrong. The performer's center of gravity shifted. He was heavy. He was carrying something under the suit. "Gun!" Jace roared. The word shattered the polite murmur of the room. The performer reached into his tunic and pulled out a disc-shaped device. He threw it, not at Lyria, but at the gravity generator embedded in the floor. The device detonated with a silent flash. Instantly, the artificial gravity in the room flickered and died. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the air as dignitaries floated upward, wine spilling in suspended globules of red liquid. The floor plates groaned, then slammed the gravity back on at double strength, pinning people to the ground. In the confusion, the performer drew a sleek energy pistol. He aimed directly at Lyria. Her guards were struggling to stand under the heavy gravity. They were too slow. Jace was not. He had moved the second he screamed. He sprinted across the room, fighting the crushing weight that tried to buckle his knees. He hit the dais like a battering ram, slamming into Lyria just as the air where she had been standing turned into superheated plasma. The blast scorched the wall, melting the metal. Jace and Lyria crashed behind a heavy banquet table, overturning it. Plates and crystal shattered around them. "Stay down," Jace yelled, shoving her head down. Another blast took a chunk out of the table. Lyria was coughing, dust and smoke filling her lungs. She looked at Jace. His face was a mask of concentration. He had a gun in his hand, a rugged, ugly thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. He popped up, fired 2 shots, and ducked back down. "We need to move," he grunted. Lyria looked toward the main doors. Her advisors were there. Lord Vane, her father's oldest friend, was standing by the exit. He looked across the chaos, met Lyria's eyes, and then, with a chilling calmness, hit the control panel on the wall. The blast doors slammed shut. "He locked us in," Lyria whispered, horror cold in her veins. "He locked us in with them." Jace saw it too. "It is a kill box," he said grimly. "Your guards?" Lyria looked. Her personal guard, the men sworn to die for her, were holding their fire. They were watching the assassin advance. "Bought," Jace spat. "Everyone is bought." He looked at her. The princess was shaking, her luminous eyes wide with terror. But she was not screaming. She was thinking. "Maintenance tunnels," she said, her voice trembling but fast, "behind the service bar." "There is a hatch." Jace looked at the distance. 30 meters of open ground. If I get you out, Jace said, checking his ammo counter, you run. You do not stop for breath. You do not stop to fix your dress. You run. I will make you rich, Lyria stammered, gripping his arm. I will give you a planet. I will wipe your record. Jace looked at her, and for a split second a crooked grin broke his scarred face. Just buy me a better drink. Princess. He surged to his feet. Move! He provided covering fire, the loud, booming retorts of his kinetic pistol drowning out the hiss of plasma weapons. He took out the assassin's knee, buying them 3 seconds. They sprinted. Lyria's heavy dress weighed her down, but she hiked up the skirts and ran with a desperate grace. Jace stayed between her and the shooters, taking a grazing shot to his shoulder that spun him around. But he kept moving. They dove over the bar, sliding across the floor. Jace kicked the maintenance hatch open. Inside, Lyria dropped into the dark shaft. Jace followed, sealing the hatch from the inside just as a plasma grenade turned the bar into splinters. They fell into the darkness, landing on a pile of conduit cables. The tunnel was cramped, lit only by emergency strobes. Jace groaned, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers. You are hit, Lyria gasped, reaching for him. Walk it off, Jace gritted out, pushing himself up. They have the station schematics. They will be cutting us off at every intersection. He looked at the princess. Her expensive dress was torn, her face was smeared with soot, and she looked absolutely terrified. But she was alive. Who are they? Jace asked, leading the way down the tunnel. Lyria wiped her face, leaving a streak of grime on her silver markings. I do not know, she said softly. But they have the codes, which means the rot goes all the way to the top. Then we keep running, Jace said, the soldier taking over the man, until we run out of station. They moved deeper into the bowels of the machine, the sound of magnetic boots ringing on the metal above them, the hunters closing in. The air in Cargo Bay 9 tasted of stale, recycled oxygen and burning lubricant. It was a cavernous, shadowy space where the station's artificial gravity hummed at a slightly lower frequency, making every movement feel dreamlike and heavy. Jace slammed his hand against the rusted hull of the freighter, an ugly, blocky vessel named the Iron Mule. The loading ramp was half raised, and a heavy-set captain with a cybernetic eye was glaring down at them. We are full, the captain growled, his voice modulated by a cheap vocal synthesizer. No passengers, get lost. Station rat. Jace did not flinch. He reached into his vest and pulled out his security badge, flashing the holographic seal of the station authority. It was a bluff. His authority had likely been revoked the moment he shot at the assassins. But the captain did not know that yet. I am not asking for a ticket, Jace barked, his voice carrying the sharp edge of command. I am giving you an order. We have a Class 4 radiation leak in the tertiary coolant loop of this sector. The magnetic seals are blowing in 3 minutes. The captain's human eye widened. A Class 4? The sensors are not picking up anything. That is because the sensors are already fried. Jace lied smoothly, stepping forward and shoving Lyria up the ramp ahead of him. Unless you want your crew cooked from the inside out and your cargo to glow in the dark for the next 100 years, you will undock now. Emergency override code Alpha 9. Move. Fear is a universal motivator. The captain did not ask for a code check. He smashed a button on the hydraulic controls. The ramp hissed and began to close. Jace grabbed a strut and hauled himself inside, pulling Lyria after him just as the heavy Durasteel door sealed with a thud. Moments later, the deck vibrated beneath their feet as the docking clamps released and the ship's thrusters fired, pushing them away from the station and into the black. They were safe. For now. Lyria collapsed onto a crate of freeze-dried protein blocks, her breathing ragged. The elaborate bioluminescent petals of her dress were torn, flickering weakly in the dim light of the hold. She looked out of place. A gemstone dropped in a coal chute. Jace leaned against the bulkhead, sliding down until he hit the floor. He winced, his hand going to his shoulder where the laser grays pulsed with heat. "That was impressive," Lyria said, her voice shaking slightly. "You are an accomplished liar. It is part of the job description," Jace muttered, closing his eyes. "Where are we going?" Lyria asked, straightening up. Her fear was receding, replaced by the imperious tone of someone used to giving orders. "The captain needs a destination. We must head to the core worlds. My father's fleet will be patrolling the Valeron sector. Once we reach his perimeter, we are safe." Jace opened one eye. The iris was dark, hard. "If we go to the core, you are dead before we break atmosphere." Lyria bristled. "That is absurd. My father is the Emperor. His palace is the safest place in the galaxy. Your father's advisor is the one who locked us in that kill box," Jace said, his voice flat. "Do you think he acted alone? If you show up on the doorstep now, they will just finish the job and blame it on rebel factions. You are a loose end, princess." Lyria stared at him, her mouth opening to argue, but the words died in her throat. She remembered Lord Vane's cold face as the blast doors slid shut. She remembered the hesitation of her own guards. "Then where?" she asked, her voice smaller. "Othris 4, Jace said. "The scrapyard moon?" Lyria looked horrified. "That is a wasteland. It is a graveyard for ships and criminals." "Exactly," Jace said, struggling to his stand. "No sensors, no patrols, and enough interference to hide a fleet, let alone 2 runaways. I have a contact there, old intelligence. If anyone can decrypt the comms log I grabbed from your attacker, it is him. He is taking us to a garbage heap," Lyria whispered to the empty air. Jace ignored her, banging on the intercom to the bridge. "Captain, set course for the Othris system, and keep the transponder off." The voyage took 3 days. 3 days of cramped quarters, recycled air that smelled of ozone and unwashed bodies, and a tension thick enough to choke on. The Iron Mule was not built for comfort. Jace and Lyria were forced to share a small crew cabin that had clearly been used for storage. Jace took the floor, rolling up his tactical vest as a pillow. Lyria took the narrow bunk, curling up in her ruined finery. The first night, Jace woke up screaming. It was not a theatrical scream. It was a guttural, choked sound like a man trying to expel poison from his lungs. He sat bolt upright, his hand clawing for a weapon that was not there, his chest heaving. Lyria was awake instantly. She sat up, watching him from the shadows of the bunk. She did not say anything at first. She just watched the way the sweat slicked his hair to his forehead, the way his eyes darted around the room, seeing enemies in the dark corners. "Jace," she said softly. He flinched, his head snapping toward her. For a second, he looked at her with pure, unadulterated violence. Then, the recognition kicked in. The soldier receded, the man returned. He rubbed his face with trembling hands. "Go back to sleep," he rasped. "You were dreaming," she said. "You were shouting coordinates." "I said go to sleep." Lyria lay back down, but she did not close her eyes. She watched the rise and fall of his chest until his breathing leveled out. She felt a strange pang in her chest, not pity, exactly, but a resonance. She knew what it was like to be haunted, even if her ghosts were polite courtiers in silent rooms rather than blood and fire. By the second day, the silence had morphed into bickering. It was a defense mechanism for both of them. You snore, Lyria announced, kicking his boot from her bunk. It sounds like a hyperdrive with a cracked manifold. And you talk in your sleep, Jace shot back, not looking up from the pistol he was cleaning. You were ordering someone to bring you the blue wine, not the red. Very critical stuff. I do not drink wine. Lyria sniffed. I was likely ordering an execution. Jace actually chuckled at that. It was a dry, rusty sound. You are unbearable, Lyria said, swinging her legs over the edge of the bunk. Is this how you treat everyone? Or am I special? You are special, Jace said, snapping the barrel back onto the frame. Most people I meet are not carrying a target on their back the size of a dreadnought. Lyria looked down at her hands. The silver markings on her skin seemed duller in the ship's harsh lighting. I feel like a ghost, she admitted quietly. In the palace, on the broadcasts. I am just an image, a projection of what the Empire needs. Perfect. Silent. Untouchable. Even now, running for my life, it feels like I am watching someone else do it. Jace stopped cleaning his gun. He looked at her. Really looked at her. You are not a ghost, he said. How would you know? Because ghosts do not complain about the smell of synth rations, Jace said. And they certainly do not have an attitude problem. Lyria glared at him, but there was no heat in it. You think I have an attitude problem? I think you are annoying, Jace said, but his tone was devoid of malice. You are mouthy, you are stubborn, and you are impossible to ignore. You are too real. Princess, that is your problem. Lyria blinked. She felt a flush of heat rise up her neck, turning her violet skin a deeper shade of purple. It was the most unroyal compliment she had ever received, and somehow, the best. She turned away to hide the small, pleased smile that tugged at the corner of her mouth. Clean your gun, mercenary, she said. You missed a spot. Othras 4 hung in the void like a rusted coin. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, the turbulence rattled Lyria's teeth. The view from the small porthole was a landscape of desolation. The surface was a graveyard of giants. Massive, skeletal hulls of ancient battleships lay half-buried in the orange sand. Enormous orbital cannons, long silent, pointed at the sky like accusatory fingers. The wind whipped toxic dust into towering spirals that danced between the wreckage. This place is hell, Lyria whispered. It was a battlefield, Jace corrected. Now it is just a scrapyard. They landed in a settlement called the Rust Belt, a shantytown built inside the hollowed-out engine block of a crashed supercarrier. The air was thick with grit and the smell of sulfur. Jace pulled his hood up and handed Lyria a rebreather mask. Put this on. The air is breathable, but barely. And keep your head down. If anyone sees your markings, they will sell you for parts. They moved through the crowded market. Vendors sold scavenged tech, unlabeled chemical vials, and weapons that looked likely to explode in the user's hand. Jace moved with a predator's grace, cutting a path through the crowd. Lyria stuck close to his back, her hand gripping the fabric of his jacket. They reached a secluded shack made of welded plating on the outskirts of the settlement. Jace knocked a specific rhythm on the door. 3 heavy thuds. Pause. 2 quick taps. Silence. Jace frowned. He knocked again. Nothing. He drew his pistol and stay behind me. He kicked the door. The lock, already rusted, gave way with a screech of metal. The inside of the shack was a wreck. Datapads were smashed on the floor. Furniture was overturned. And in the center of the room, slumped over a console, was a man, or what was left of him. Jace holstered his weapon and walked over, checking for a pulse he knew he would not find. He touched the man's neck. Cold. Relis, Jace whispered. Lyria stood in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth. Is he dead? Jace said, his voice hard. Professional hit. Single shot to the back of the cranium. No burn marks. Sonic round. Expensive. He scanned the room. They tossed the place, looking for something. Did they find it? Lyria asked, stepping over a pile of shattered drives. Jace knelt near the corner of the room, where a heavy metal locker lay on its side. He pulled a knife from his boot and pried up a loose floor plate beneath where the locker had stood. Relis was paranoid, Jace said. He never kept the good stuff on the servers. He pulled out a small, ruggedized data brick. It was old tech, insulated against scanning. He jacked it into his portable reader. The screen flickered to life. It is encrypted, Jace said, his fingers flying over the keypad. But Relis used the old military ciphers. I know the keys. Lines of text scrolled across the screen. Maps, bank transfers, comms logs. Jace's eyes narrowed. It is a coup, he said, not just an assassination, a full takeover. He turned the screen so Lyria could see. Regency Council, she read. They are planning to declare the Emperor unfit to rule due to failing health. They will install a temporary military government. Look at the signatories. Jace pointed. Lyria's eyes widened. House Kalen, House Vane, the Galactic Trade Consortium. My father's advisors, she whispered. The people who raised me. Keep reading, Jace said. His voice had gone strange, tight. Lyria scrolled down. There was a video file attached to the dossier. It was labeled Incident 4 Alpha. Classified. She pressed play. The image was shaky, taken from a helmet cam. It showed a burning colony. Civilians were running, screaming. In the foreground, a squad of soldiers in familiar armor, Jace's unit, were taking cover behind a wall. A voice crackled over the comms. Command. We have eyes on the civilians. We can extract them. Requesting permission to engage the enemy. Jace's voice, younger, desperate. The response was cold, static-filled, negative. Bravo, team. Stand down. Hold position. Command. They are being slaughtered. We have the firepower to stop this. Stand down. Lieutenant, that is a direct order. The target zone is to be purged. No witnesses. The video showed the soldiers watching helplessly as the colony was firebombed from orbit. The camera shook as the soldier wearing it fell to his knees, screaming in rage. Then, the screen cut to a document authorizing the strike, Operation Clean Slate, authorized by Counselor Harlan. Lyria gasped. Counselor Harlan. He was my mentor. He taught me history. He sat at my table. Jace stood up slowly. The data reader clattered to the floor. He turned to face her. His face was pale, the scar standing out like a livid brand. He signed the order, Jace said. His voice was very quiet, which was terrified Lyria more than if he had shouted. Lyria stepped back. Jace, I did not know. You did not know. Jace laughed, a harsh barking sound. That colony was a tax write-off for your family. A rounding error. My squad, my friends, we were ordered to let 5,000 people burn because your mentor wanted to clear the land for a mining operation. It was not me, Lyria shouted, anger flaring to match his. I was a child when this happened. It is your blood. Jace stepped closer, looming over her. It is your dynasty. You sit in your high towers, wearing your bio-dresses, eating food grown on the graves of people like me, and you dare to tell me you are innocent? I am not my father, Lyria screamed, shoving him back. Her hands were shaking. Do you think I chose this? Do you think I wanted to be a pawn? Humans have burned worlds too. Jace, do not pretend your hands are clean just because you hold a gun instead of a pen. They stood there, chest to chest, breathing hard. The air between them crackled with electricity. It was hate and grief and a twisted kind of recognition. They were both broken by the same machine, just from different sides of the gears. Jace looked at her, his eyes burning with tears he refused to shed. Then, he turned away, slamming his fist into the metal wall. The sound rang out like a gunshot. "We need to move," he said, his voice dead. "The storm is picking up." That night, the toxic winds of Othras 4 howled like banshees, battering the walls of the abandoned command bunker they had taken shelter in. The windstorm was severe enough to strip the paint off a hull. No one would be searching for them until it passed. Inside, the bunker was cold. A single emergency lantern cast long, dancing shadows. Jace sat on a crate, his shirt off. The wound on his shoulder was ugly, inflamed and oozing. He was trying to bandage it one-handed, his movements jerky and frustrated. "Let me do it," Lyria said. She emerged from the shadows. She had shed her ruined outer dress, wearing only the simple undertunic. She looked small, but her eyes were steady. "I do not need your help," Jace grunted. "Shut up," Lyria said gently. She knelt beside him. She took the medical gel and the bandage from his hand. Her fingers were cool against his feverish skin. Jace flinched at her touch, but he did not pull away. He sat still, staring at the wall while she worked. "I am sorry," Lyria said softly, applying the gel. "About your squad, about what Harlan did." Jace let out a long breath. "I know it wasn't you," he said. "It is just hard to look at you and not see them." Lyria finished the bandage and secured the clip. Her hand lingered on his shoulder. Her thumb traced the edge of the old scar on his back, a jagged line of white tissue. "You have so many scars," she whispered. "Maps of all the places I failed," Jace said. Lyria moved around to face him. She placed her hand on his cheek, turning his face toward hers. "You did not fail me," she said. The air in the bunker shifted. The wind outside roared, but inside, the silence was heavy, charged with a magnetic pull. Jace looked up at her. He saw the woman, not the princess. He saw the fear she hid behind her chin and the strength she hid behind her fear. He leaned in, just an inch. Lyria's breath hitched. Her gaze dropped to his lips, then back to his eyes. "We should." Jace started, his voice rough. "We should check the rest of the files." Lyria finished, though she did not move her hand from his face for another long heartbeat. They pulled apart, the moment hanging suspended in the air like smoke. They sat on the floor with the data reader between them. As the storm raged, they pieced together the puzzle. "It is not just the Regency," Lyria said, pointing to a schematic. "Look, they are coordinating attacks on 3 other royal houses. They want to create a vacuum, chaos." Jace nodded. "They create the problem. Then they offer the solution, martial law, administered by the corporate military alliance." Lyria looked at the list of assets. Station K7, the Othras blockade, the research station at the gas giant. "Wait," she said. "The research station. I thought that was a myth, a black site. It is real," Jace said. "And according to this cargo manifest, they are shipping massive amounts of neural conductive fluid there." "Mind control?" Lyria asked, horrified. "Or something worse," Jace said. Lyria sat back, hugging her knees. "They are going to enslave the leadership, turn the houses into puppets." She looked at Jace, her advisor, Vane. He knew everything. That is why the guards hesitated. Jace realized he must have given the stand-down order on a private channel. Lyria laughed, a short, brittle sound. "So, I have no guards, no allies. Just you. Jace smirked, checking the charge on his pistol. You could do worse. I suppose, Lyria said, a faint smile touching her lips. You are quiet when you are not yelling. Suddenly, Jace stiffened. He held up a hand. Silence. The wind outside was still howling, but there was another sound underneath it. The high-pitched whine of repulsor lifts. They are here, Jace hissed. How? Lyria whispered. The storm. They have thermal optics, Jace said. They tracked the heat signature of the bunker. He kicked the lantern over, plunging the room into darkness. Get behind the generator. The bunker door exploded inward. Dust and blinding light flooded the room. 3 figures in heavy combat armor stormed in, weapons raised. Jace opened fire from the shadows. His kinetic rounds sparked off their armor, but the impact staggered the lead soldier. Move left, Jace yelled. Lyria scrambled behind a heavy plasteel desk. A plasma bolt slagged the metal inches from her head. She fumbled with her wrist. During the trip, she had modified a piece of her jewelry, a ceremonial bracelet, into a primitive shock caster using parts from Jace's toolkit. One of the soldiers flanked her position. Lyria raised her wrist. Eat static, she yelled, triggering the device. A bolt of blue electricity arced out, hitting the soldier in the neck seal of his armor. He seized up and collapsed, twitching. Nice shot, Jace called out, dropping another target with a precise shot to the visor. One left. The final soldier tossed a grenade. Jace dove, tackling Lyria and covering her body with his own. The explosion rocked the bunker, showering them with concrete dust. Jace rolled, coming up on one knee. He fired 3 rapid shots. The soldier fell. Silence returned, save for the ringing in their ears. Jace coughed, waving away the dust. Next time, Your Highness, duck before the plasma bolts start flying. Next time. Lyria coughed back, pushing his heavy weight off her. Give me a warning before you decide to use me as a mattress. They scrambled to the door. Outside, a sleek black shuttle sat idling in the storm, its ramp lowered for the hit squad that would not be returning. Jace looked at the shuttle, then at Lyria. Can you fly that thing? Lyria looked at the controls as they sprinted up the ramp. It is standard Imperial Navy design. If it has wings, I can crash it with style. Get us out of here, Jace yelled, slapping the door release. Lyria punched the throttle. The shuttle roared, lurching into the sky. They blasted through the dust storm, the G-forces pinning them to their seats. As they broke through the cloud layer and into the star-strewn blackness of space, Jace looked over at Lyria. She was gripping the yoke, her knuckles white, a fierce grin on her face. She looked wild, dangerous. We are clear, she breathed. Jace looked back at the receding moon. They know we have the data, he said. The whole galaxy is going to be hunting us now. Let them come, Lyria said, setting a course for the coordinates of the secret research station. We have a war to stop. Jace watched her, and for the first time in a decade, he felt something other than the cold weight of survival. He felt a spark. We make a good team, he said quietly. Lyria glanced at him, her eyes shining. Do not let it go to your head, veteran. You still snore. Jace laughed, and this time, it was a real sound. The shuttle streaked away into the dark, 2 sparks of light against the endless void. The stolen shuttle, now rechristened the Stray by a sarcastic Lyria, rattled as it dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the chaotic asteroid belt known as the Drift. This was not a place found on official Imperial navigation charts. It was a clustered hive of hollowed-out rocks connected by pressurized tubes and magnetic tethers. A floating bazaar where the laws of the Empire dissolved into the laws of commerce and survival. We need fuel, Jace said, checking the readouts. and we need to disappear before we reappear. Lyria looked out the viewport, her eyes wide. The drift was a kaleidoscope of neon signage bolted onto jagged stone. Holographic dancers shimmered 50 feet tall against the vacuum, advertising gambling dens while skiffs zipped between the asteroids like frantic insects. It is vibrant, Lyria said, searching for the right word. It is a cesspool, Jace corrected, guiding the shuttle into a docking cradle that looked like it had been welded together from scrap metal. But it is the only place we can buy supplies without flagging a patrol. Keep your hood up, if anyone asks. You are mute. They disembarked into the sensory assault of the bazaar. The air smelled of ozone, frying meat, and exotic spices. Music thumped from unseen speakers, a bass rhythm that vibrated in the floor plating. Species from a dozen fringe worlds mingled here. Hulking reptilians with scales like obsidian, insectoid traders clicking their mandibles, and humans with cybernetic eyes glowing in the gloom. Lyria, despite the danger, was fascinated. She had spent her life in sterilized corridors and hushed throne rooms. This was life, messy and loud. She stopped at a street vendor's stall where a four-armed chef was flipping skewers of sizzling blue meat over an open flame. "What is this?" she asked, forgetting the instruction to be mute. Jace sighed, stepping up beside her. "It is fire slug, from the volcanic moons of Drax. Is it good?" Jace smirked. "Define good." Lyria, feeling rebellious, slapped a credit chip on the counter. "One, please." The chef handed her a skewer. Steam curled off the meat, smelling sharp and acidic. Lyria took a delicate bite. For 2 seconds, she looked thoughtful. Then, her eyes bulged. Her violet skin turned a shade of alarming indigo. She made a sound like a strangulated squeak, dropping the skewer. "Water," she gasped, clutching her throat. Jace leaned against the stall, crossing his arms, a wicked grin on his face. The spice hits the sinuses first, then it melts the tongue. "Help me," she wheezed, tears streaming down her face. Jace bought a pouch of chilled milk from the vendor and handed it to her. She drank it desperately, coughing and spluttering, while Jace laughed, a low, genuine rumble that made him look 10 years younger. "You are cruel," Lyria said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. She glared at him, but her eyes were bright with humor. "I am educational," Jace countered. "Lesson 1 of the Outer Rim. Do not eat anything that glows brighter than the local star." They moved deeper into the market, the playful mood lingering like a shield against the tension. They needed gear for where they were going next, a place far more hostile than a spicy lunch. At a stall tucked into a shadowy alcove, racks of illegal cybernetics hung like cuts of meat. The vendor, a cyborg with half his face replaced by a sensor array, watched them approach. "I need a neural interface kit," Lyria said, pointing to a dusty box on the shelf. "Dual channel." Jace stiffened. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her back. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a hard whisper. "Absolutely not." "We might need it," Lyria insisted, shaking off his hand. The data from Othris mentioned biometric locks on the research station. "If we need to coordinate silently, or if one of us needs to access a system the other cannot reach, a link is the only way." "Do you know what that tech does?" Jace hissed, glancing at the vendor. "They used it in the interrogation camps. It forces two minds to sync. If you are not trained, it can scramble your neurons. It strips you bare. Lyria, no secrets, no walls." Lyria looked at him. "Are you afraid of what I will see?" "Jace?" Jace's jaw tightened. "I am afraid it will break you." "I am not glass," she said firmly. "Buy it." Jace glared at her, then at the vendor. He threw a handful of credits on the counter. The vendor smirked, sliding the box across. As they turned to leave, a massive holographic screen above the plaza flickered. The static cleared, replaced by a breaking news alert from the Imperial Core. Two faces rotated in high definition. One was Lyria. The image was an official portrait, regal, untouched, beautiful. The caption read, "Her Highness Princess Lyria kidnapped by rogue elements." The other face was Jace. It was a grainy service photo, his eyes dead and cold. Suspect identified, former Lieutenant Jace Corrin, wanted for treason, murder, and abduction. Extreme caution advised. The reward figure flashing beneath Jace's face was high enough to buy the entire asteroid they were standing on. A hush rippled through the immediate crowd. Heads turned. Eyes compared the hologram to the scarred man standing by the cybernetics stall. A large, armored mercenary near the front of the crowd unclipped a heavy blaster from his belt. "Hey," he grunted. "That is him." "Run," Jace said. He did not wait for an answer. He grabbed Lyria's hand and bolted. A laser blast scorched the metal crate where they had been standing a second ago. The bazaar erupted into chaos. Shoppers screamed and scattered as the mercenary opened fire, not caring who got in the way. Jace pulled Lyria through a maze of hanging tapestries, knocking over displays of rare crystals to create obstacles. They sprinted down a narrow alleyway, boots skidding on slick oil. "Left!" Jace shouted, shoving her toward a maintenance ramp. 3 more bounty hunters cut them off, appearing on the catwalk above. Plasma fire rained down, sizzling against the deck plates. Jace drew his kinetic pistol, firing on the run. He took out the support strut of a heavy cargo net suspended above the hunters. The net collapsed, burying them under tons of scrap metal parts. They burst out of the alley and onto the main docking ring. Their shuttle was 500 yards away. A speeder bike roared toward them, the pilot aiming a mounted cannon. "Jump!" Jace yelled. They leaped over the edge of the walkway, free-falling 20 feet onto the canopy of a cargo hauler passing below. They slid down the curved hull, hitting the deck hard, and scrambled toward their ship. Jace spun around, firing 2 shots into the control panel of the docking clamp holding their shuttle. The clamps blew open with a shower of sparks. They scrambled up the ramp just as the heavy blast doors of the bazaar began to seal. Jace punched the launch sequence before he was even fully in the pilot's seat. The Stray shot backward, scraping paint off the airlock, and rocketed into the void. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the roar of the engines and their own ragged breathing. Then, Lyria started to laugh. It was a breathless, hysterical sound, born of pure adrenaline. She slumped in the co-pilot's seat, her hood thrown back, hair wild. Did you see that mercenary's face when the cargo net fell?" She wheezed. Jace looked at her. He was covered in soot, his scar throbbing, his heart hammering against his ribs. And he started laughing too. He leaned his head back against the seat, the laughter shaking his chest. "I thought we were dead," he admitted, wiping tears from his eyes. "I really thought that was it. You are worth 50 million credits." Lyria giggled. "I am offended. They only offered 10 million for my safe return. I am high maintenance." Jace grinned. The laughter faded slowly, leaving a comfortable silence in the cockpit. They were alive. They were moving. And the fear that had defined their existence for days had, for a brief moment, been replaced by the thrill of survival. Jace engaged the hyperdrive coordinates. The stars stretched into lines of light. "Next stop, the eye of the storm," he said quietly. "Get some rest. Princess, the fun part is over." The Authoress data had pointed them to the Cronus system, a binary star system dominated by a massive gas giant named Typhon. The planet was a churning ball of violent orange and gray storms, possessing a magnetic field strong enough to crush a standard frigate. Hidden deep within the southern storm belt, masked by the intense radiation, was the target, Facility 9. Flying into the atmosphere of Typhon was like flying into the throat of a beast. Lightning bolts the size of cities arced through the clouds, illuminating the cockpit in blinding flashes of violet and white. The ship shook violently, metal groaning under the pressure. "Keep the shields angled forward," Jace shouted over the roar of the turbulence. "I am trying," Lyria yelled back, her hands flying over the controls. "The magnetic interference is eating our sensors." "There," Jace pointed. Through a break in the swirling clouds, a shape emerged. It was a jagged ring of dark metal, suspended in the eye of a hurricane. Lightning crawled over its surface like living vines. It looked less like a station and more like a wound in the sky. "It is beautiful," Lyria whispered, "terrified and hateful." They guided the shuttle into a maintenance hangar located on the underside of the ring, using the storm's noise to mask their approach. Jace bypassed the external airlock codes with the decryption key they had stolen. The air inside the station was sterile, cold, and silent. It smelled of ozone and antiseptic. They moved through the corridors, weapons drawn. The architecture was severe, black metal, white lights, no windows. "This level is containment," Jace whispered, reading the wall markings. They found the labs. They were not clean, white rooms. They were cells. Rows of glass tanks lined the walls. Inside floated subjects, human, alien, some unrecognizable. They were hooked up to thick cables that drilled directly into their skulls. Lyria stopped in front of a tank containing a young man in the uniform of the Royal Guard. His eyes were open, vacant, staring at nothing. A metallic crown-like device was fused to his temples. "Jace," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Look at the monitors." Jace looked. The screen displayed neural activity, but it was not random. It was a loop, a command sequence repeating over and over. Obey, protect, serve the Council. "It is not just soldiers," Jace said, moving to a console. He pulled up a schematic. "Look at the design of the interface. It is meant to be integrated into ceremonial headgear, thrones, command chairs." Lyria felt the blood drain from her face. They are not just building an army. They are building a cage for the mind. They plan to install this in the rulers of the houses. My father. "If they put that crown on him," Jace said grimly, "he becomes a meat puppet. The Council rules through him, and no one ever knows." Lyria leaned against the glass, looking at the trapped guard, the empire she had believed in. The flawed but necessary structure of order was a lie. It was rotting from the core out, fueled by the suffering of people like this. "It is all poison," she whispered. "Everything my family built. It is just power eating itself." She felt a hand take hers. It was warm, rough, calloused. Jace did not say anything. He just held her hand, anchoring her to the reality of the moment, letting her lean her weight against his shoulder. "We can stop it," he said softly. "But we need the core data from the central server. We need proof of who ordered this." A faint sound came from a nearby cell, a whimper. Jace raised his weapon. They moved toward the sound. Inside a holding cell, a woman was huddled in the corner. She was shivering, wires dangling from ports in her neck. She looked up as they entered, terror in her eyes. "Please," she croaked. "No more noise, no more voices." "We are not with them," Lyria said, kneeling fast. "We are getting you out." The woman grabbed Lyria's arm. Her grip was weak, skeletal. "The crown." The woman gasped. "The doctor. He makes us wear the crown. It takes the memories away. It puts his voice in. Do not let him in. Where is the central server? Jace asked gently. The core. The woman pointed to the ceiling. Top level. The doctor's lab. Only he can enter. Bioscan. Jace looked at Lyria. We cannot blast our way in. If we trip the alarm before we get the data, they will purge the drives. Lyria stood up. She looked at the neural link kit clipped to Jace's belt. We use the link, she said. Jace shook his head. No. It is too dangerous. Jace, listen. Lyria's voice was steel. I have the diplomatic codes. I can forge a clearance signal, but I need to be at the terminal inside the lab to inject it. You need to guide me from the security hub. You can see the patrols, loop the cameras. I will be your hands. You will be my eyes. It requires complete synchronization. Jace argued. If I get distracted, if you panic, I will not panic, she said. Trust me. Jace looked at her. He saw the fear. Yes, but he also saw the resolve. She was a queen in the making, standing in a torture chamber ready to fight. Okay, he said. They found a small, dim storage room to set up the link. They sat on the floor, facing each other, knees touching. Jace unpacked the device, two thin silver filaments that attached to the temples. He placed the sensors on Lyria's skin. His fingers lingered for a second on her cheek. If it hurts, tell me, he said. If it gets too loud, pull it off. I am ready, she whispered. Jace attached his own sensors. He took a deep breath. Initiating link in 3, 2, 1. The world vanished. It was not a sound. It was a flood. Suddenly, Jace was not just in the room. He was in her. He felt the silk of her tunic against her skin. He felt the cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. He smelled the scent of lavender soap she used. And Lyria was in him. She felt the ache in his shoulder, a dull, throbbing fire. She felt the weight of the gun on his hip. She felt the deep, crushing exhaustion that lived in his marrow. Then came the images, unguarded, raw. Lyria saw a flash of a muddy field, rain falling, a child, no older than 5, holding a stuffed toy, looking up at Jace with wide eyes. Jace reaching out, screaming, as the orbital bombardment turned the world white. The guilt washed over Lyria like a tidal wave, a conviction that he was poison, that he destroyed everything he touched. I am sorry, she thought, and the thought echoed in his mind. Jace saw a ballroom, huge, golden, empty. Lyria standing in the center, a doll in a glass box. Her father, the Emperor, looking at her without seeing her. You are useful, Lyria. Do not forget your purpose, the crushing loneliness, the feeling of being an object, polished and sold, the desire to scream just to hear a real sound. You are not an object. Jace's thought wrapped around her, fierce and protective. They opened their eyes in the physical world, but the connection remained. They were staring at each other, pupils dilated. The intimacy was shattering. It was deeper than skin, deeper than words. They knew each other's shame, their weakness, and the desperate, hungry desire that had been building between them. Lyria leaned forward. She was trembling. Jace's breath hitched. He could feel her heart racing as if it were his own. Jace, she whispered. He leaned in. The distance between them closed. He could feel the ghost of her kiss before their lips even touched, a phantom sensation of softness and heat. Whoop, whoop, whoop. The red alert klaxon screamed through the station. Jace ripped the sensors off his head with a curse. Lyria gasped, the sudden severance leaving her dizzy. They found the bodies in the lower labs. Jace yelled over the alarm. We are out of time. The moment was shattered, but the energy of it still hummed in the air. They scrambled to their feet, weapons drawn. Go, Jace said. The plan is still on. I will guide you. Lyria nodded, composing her face into a mask of cold authority. She slipped out the door, heading for the upper labs. Jace sprinted for the security hub. He hacked the door, took out the lone guard with a silent takedown, and jacked into the console. He put the earpiece in. "I am in," he said. "Turn left at the junction. 2 guards. Loop the camera. Now." Lyria moved through the corridors like a ghost. With Jace's voice in her ear and the residual connection of the link guiding her instincts, she bypassed the patrols. She reached the central lab. The doors hissed open. The lab was a cathedral of technology. In the center, a massive server column pulsed with blue light, and standing in front of it was a man in a white coat, tall, gaunt, with eyes that looked like broken glass. Dr. Crane. He turned as Lyria entered. He did not look surprised. He looked delighted. "Princess," he smiled. "We were wondering when you would arrive." Lyria raised her weapon. "Step away from the console." "Doctor." Crane laughed. He tapped a command on his datapad. The gravity generators cut out. Instantly. Lyria floated upward, her stomach lurching. The room became a chaotic swirl of floating equipment. "Jace," she yelled into the comms. "0G, I am coming." Jace's voice roared. Crane pushed off the console, moving with the practiced ease of someone used to low gravity. He drew a needle gun. "You are a perfect specimen. Lyria," he crooned, drifting toward her. "Your brain mapping will be exquisite." He fired. A tranquilizer dart whizzed past Lyria's ear. She fired back, but the recoil in 0G spun her backward, slamming her into the ceiling. Crane lunged, grabbing her ankle. He pulled her down, aiming the needle at her neck. The lab door exploded inward. Jace burst in, using his magnetic boots to anchor himself to the floor. He saw Crane on top of Lyria. He did not hesitate. He raised his kinetic pistol. "Get off her!" Crane used Lyria as a human shield, spinning her around. "And drop the gun, Lieutenant, or the princess becomes a vegetable right now." Lyria looked at Jace. She saw the hesitation. She saw the terror of hitting her. She remembered the link. She remembered his mind. "Trust me," she thought, projecting it toward him with everything she had. She suddenly went limp. Dead weight. Crane stumbled, his grip slipping for a fraction of a second. Jace fired. The bullet took Crane in the shoulder, spinning him away. Lyria kicked off the scientist's chest, propelling herself toward the server. Crane screamed, floating in a cloud of his own blood. He raised his needle gun again, aiming at Jace. Jace stood his ground, firing again and again. 2 shots to the chest. Crane jerked and went still, floating lifelessly in the air. But as he died, his finger spasmed on the trigger. A single needle dart flew across the room. It did not hit Jace. It hit the coolant tank next to him. The tank ruptured. Freezing, pressurized gas exploded outward, turning into jagged shards of ice in the vacuum. A shard of ice the size of a dagger slammed into Jace's side, piercing his armor. Jace grunted, the sound wet and heavy. He dropped to one knee, the magnetic lock holding him down. "Jace!" Lyria screamed. She grabbed the data core, ripping it from the server. She kicked off the wall, swimming through the air to him. She grabbed his harness. "We have to go. The coolant is destabilizing the reactor." The station began to shake. The lights flickered and died, replaced by emergency red strobes. Jace stumbled to his feet, clutching his side. Blood was already pooling, dark and viscous, floating in droplets around them. "I can walk," he lied. They fled the collapsing station. Corridors twisted and buckled around them. Explosions rocked the hull. They reached the shuttle bay just as the floor began to tear apart. They threw themselves into the stray. Lyria slammed the launch sequence. The shuttle blasted out of the hangar bay seconds before the research ring imploded, a silent, beautiful blossom of fire against the backdrop of the gas giant's storm. In the cockpit, Jace collapsed into the co-pilot's seat. His face was gray. Lyria engaged the autopilot and scrambled to him. She tore open his jacket. The wound was deep, ugly. "We need a med bay," she said, her voice rising in panic. "A real one. No hospitals," Jace rasped, his eyes fluttering shut. "They will be watching." "Then where?" Lyria cried, pressing her hands against the wound to staunch the flow. "Outpost. Zulu 9, Jace whispered. "Abandoned, ice world. Medical cache." He passed out. Lyria looked at the star map. Zulu 9. It was sectors away, a frozen rock on the edge of nowhere. "Hold on. Jace," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "You do not get to die on me. Not after you saw inside my head. You are not allowed to leave." She pushed the engines to maximum. The Stray streaked into hyperspace, carrying a dying soldier, a terrified princess, and the secret that could burn the Empire to the ground. The wind on Voros III did not just blow, it hunted. It screamed across the frozen sea, tearing at the jagged cliffs of ice and slamming into the rusted plating of Outpost Zulu 9 with the force of a physical blow. The outpost was a ghost, a relic of the border wars that had been left to rot in the snow. It perched precariously on the edge of a glacier, its sensor arrays bent and broken, its landing pad a sheet of treacherous black ice. The Stray touched down hard, skidding sideways before the magnetic clamps engaged with a groan of protesting metal. Inside the cockpit, the silence that followed was deafening. Jace unbuckled his harness, his movement stiff and hitched. He tried to stand, but his legs folded beneath him. He hit the deck plating with a dull thud, his hand clutching his side where the shard of ice from the research station had pierced his armor. Lyria was there in an instant. "Do not you dare," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't you dare close your eyes. Jace Corin." "I am awake," Jace gritted out, though his voice sounded like it was coming from the other end of a long tunnel. "Just need a minute." "You do not have a minute," Lyria said. She hauled him up, grunting with the effort. Her bio-dress, once a marvel of glowing elegance, was shredded and stained with grease and dark blood. She did not look like a princess anymore. She looked like a survivor. They stumbled down the ramp into the biting cold. The temperature was low enough to freeze exposed skin in seconds, but Jace was burning up. The infection from the dirty ice was already spreading, a hot spiderweb of poison moving through his veins. The airlock of the outpost opened with a shrieking grind of gears that had not turned in a decade. They fell inside, the door sealing out the roar of the storm. The interior was dark, lit only by the flickering emergency strobes that Jace's presence had triggered. It smelled of stagnant air, old coolant, and memories. Jace leaned heavily against the bulkhead, his vision swimming. He knew this hallway. He knew the scuff marks on the floor. He remembered the faces of the men who used to walk here, men who had died because of orders he had relayed. "Ghosts," he muttered, delirious. "They are all here." Lyria ignored him, dragging him toward the medical bay. "Stay with me." "Jace, tell me where the trauma kit is. Cabinet, left wall." Jace gasped as she lowered him onto a dust-covered examination table. "Code 472. Lyria tapped the code into the keypad. It sparked, then popped open. Inside, half the canisters were ruptured or expired. But she found a sealed tube of military-grade biogel and a sterilized stapler. She turned back to him. She ripped open his jacket and the thermal shirt beneath. The wound was ugly, a jagged puncture surrounded by purple bruising. Her hands shook. She was trained in court etiquette, in history, in the subtle art of negotiation. She had never stitched a body back together. "Do not look at me like that," she snapped, seeing his eyes tracking her trembling fingers. "I am not looking at anything. Jace lied, his teeth chattering, just admiring the decor. Lyria bit her lip, uncapping the gel. This is going to hurt. It already hurts. Jace breathed. She poured the gel into the wound. Jace arched his back, a guttural cry tearing from his throat as the chemical burned away the infection. Lyria did not stop. She grabbed the stapler, lining up the edges of the torn skin. "Talk to me," she ordered, her voice high and panicked. "Distract me, Jace. I hate this place." Jace gasped, his hand gripping the edge of the table so hard the metal warped. "We spent 6 months here, dug into the ice. Why?" Lyria asked, firing the first staple. Thwack. "Protecting a fuel depot," Jace said through clenched teeth. "Strategic asset." Turns out, the depot was empty. We bled for an empty room. Thwack. Lyria paused, wiping sweat from her forehead. Her hands were slick with his blood. The sight of it, bright red against her violet skin, made her stomach turn. But she forced herself to continue. "Why do you do it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you let yourself be used like this? Even now, you could have left me on the station and you could have walked away. I tried," Jace rasped. "No, you did not," Lyria argued, firing another staple. "You pretend to be a mercenary. Jace, but you are terrible at it. You care too much. I am broken, Lyria," Jace shouted, the pain making him lash out. "Look at me. I am a collection of scars and bad memories. I am not a hero. I am the wreckage left behind. You should find someone else to save you, someone whole." "I am sick of whole people," Lyria screamed back, startling him. She threw the stapler onto a tray with a clatter. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by whole, perfect, polished people," she said, her chest heaving. "They smile and they lie, and they sign death warrants with gold pens. You are the first person I have met who is actually real." She leaned over him, her eyes blazing with a ferocity that matched the storm outside. "You are broken. Fine. So am I. I am a princess with no kingdom, a diplomat with no voice, and I am terrified every single second. But I am here. And you are here." She placed her hands on his chest to steady him, and as her skin touched his bare flesh, the neural link, still active, still dormant in their subconscious, flared to life. It was not a visual hallucination this time. It was a tidal wave of pure feeling. Lyria gasped as Jace's pain slammed into her, not just the physical fire in his side, but the crushing weight of his self-loathing, the cold, dark hole where his hope used to be. She felt his conviction that he was unlovable, that he was dangerous to anyone who got close. And Jace felt her. He felt the panic clawing at her throat, the desperate, clawing fear that she was going to watch him die just like she had watched her ideals die. But beneath the panic, he felt something else, a fierce, stubborn affection, a heat that had nothing to do with fever. She wanted him, not as a guard, not as a tool, but as him. The connection dragged them under. For a moment, the room dissolved. There was only the sensation of two minds trying to occupy the same space, tangling together in a messy, chaotic knot. Jace looked up at her, his eyes wide, his pupils blown. He could feel her desire pulsing in his own veins, a confusing, overwhelming mix of his arousal and hers. "Lyria," he whispered, his voice shaking. She pulled back, breaking the physical contact, gasping as if coming up for air. The link receded to a dull hum, leaving them both breathless and flushed. The air in the cold medical bay was suddenly thick, charged with an electricity that made the hair on Jace's arm stand up. I finished the stitches," Lyria stammered, stepping back. Her cheeks were a deep, dark purple. Jace lay there, breathing hard, the pain in his side dulling to a throb, replaced by a much sharper ache in his chest. "Thank you," he said roughly. Lyria nodded, turning away quickly to busy herself with cleaning the instruments. "Get some sleep, Jace. We are safe here for now." Jace watched her back, watching the way her shoulders shook, and for the first time in 10 years, he did not want to drink himself into oblivion. He wanted to stand up. Recovery was slow, but the biogel did its work. By the next afternoon, Jace could walk without seeing black spots. He found Lyria in the main hangar bay. The hangar was a cavernous space carved directly into the ice, the walls shimmering with frost. In the center of the bay, looming out of the shadows like a dormant beast, stood the Walker. It was a Titan-class assault platform, a relic from the height of the expansion wars. It stood 20 feet tall, a humanoid machine of scarred durasteel and hydraulic muscle. One arm ended in a massive rotary cannon, the other in a siege claw meant for tearing through bunker walls. It was missing armor plates, exposing the complex machinery beneath, and it was covered in dust, but it was still magnificent in a terrifying way. Lyria was standing at the foot of one of its massive legs, looking up. She looked tiny next to it. Jace limped up beside her, his boots echoing on the metal deck. "We called her the Iron Witch," Jace said softly, "because she was ugly, mean, and had a habit of surviving when everyone else burned." Lyria jumped slightly, then looked at him. She reached out, running a gloved hand along the cold metal of the Walker's shin. "You piloted this?" she asked. Jace nodded. "For 3 years. It is intimate. You plug in, and the machine's sensors become your nerves. You feel the ground crush under the feet. You feel the recoil in your teeth." He looked at the machine with a mix of affection and revulsion. "I spent more time inside her than I did in my own bunk. Easier to talk to. She never asked me about the morality of the mission. She just asked for ammo and fuel." "It is terrifying," Lyria admitted. "It is a monument to violence. It is a tool," Jace corrected. "It is just metal and math. It is the hands on the controls that decide if it is a monster or a shield." He looked at Lyria. She seemed fascinated by it, tracing the hydraulic lines with her eyes. "Want to see the view from the top?" he asked. Lyria looked at him, surprised. "Is it safe?" Jace smirked. "Safer than the ground." He led her to the maintenance gantry. They climbed the metal stairs, the cold air biting at their faces. Jace moved slowly, favoring his side, but he refused her help this time. He needed to prove to himself that he was mobile. They reached the cockpit hatch. Jace punched in a manual override code. The heavy canopy hissed, seal breaking, and lifted with a pneumatic whine. Jace climbed onto the hull and offered her a hand. Lyria took it, pulling herself up. The cockpit was surprisingly spacious, designed for long-duration patrols, but it was crowded with screens, levers, and pedals. The smell of old leather and hydraulic fluid wafted out. In the center sat the pilot's cradle, which was really 2 seats in tandem, fused into a single shock-absorbing unit. The rear seat was for the driver, the front for the gunner. Lyria stared at the front seat. It was a bucket seat, deep and wide, flanked by 2 massive control sticks that looked like the horns of a bull. It was clearly designed for a soldier wearing bulky power armor. She looked at the seat, then at herself, then back at the seat. She let out a nervous, breathless laugh. "It is big," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the hangar. She patted the wide, worn leather of the gunner's chair, glancing back at Jace with a flushed, mischievous look. "Sit here." Jace froze. He looked at her, seeing the sudden playfulness in her eyes, the way her cheeks had darkened. It was a double meaning, sharp and clear, hanging between them like a challenge. He smirked, a slow, dangerous expression that made the scar on his face crinkle. He stepped closer, moving into her personal space. The cockpit was cramped. His chest brushed against her back as he leaned in. "Careful what you ask for." "Princess," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in her ear. He reached past her, not to touch her, but to flip a bank of toggle switches on the console. The machine hummed to life beneath them, a deep vibration that traveled up through the soles of their boots and into their bones. Lyria's breath hitched. She could feel the heat of him behind her, solid and heavy. "Sit," Jace commanded softly. Lyria sat in the gunner's chair. It swallowed her. She felt small, enveloped by the machine and the man standing directly behind her. Jace leaned over the back of the chair, his arms coming around her to grab the secondary controls. He was effectively caging her in, his body forming a protective shell around hers. "Put your hands on the sticks," he instructed. Lyria reached out, wrapping her fingers around the cold grips. They were too large for her hands. Jace covered her hands with his. His palms were rough, warm, and massive compared to hers. He guided her grip, adjusting her fingers. "Gentle," he whispered, his mouth inches from her ear. "The witch is sensitive. You treat her rough, she bucks. You treat her right." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Lyria shivered. The vibration of the engine increased. "Press your thumbs forward to arm the main cannon," Jace said. Lyria did. A holographic targeting reticle sprang to life on the canopy glass, glowing red. "Now," Jace said, his voice dropping deeper, husky with a tension that had nothing to do with combat. "Find a target. That ice spire at 2 o'clock. Lyria moved the sticks. Jace's hands moved with hers, guiding the heavy machinery. The massive turret outside whirred, tracking her movement. The sound was visceral, a mechanical growl. "Line it up," Jace murmured. I have it," Lyria breathed. "Squeeze the triggers." Lyria squeezed. Boom! The recoil shook the entire outpost. A single tracer round the size of a loaf of bread shrieked across the frozen bay and slammed into the ice spire. The spire exploded in a shower of diamond dust and steam. The shockwave rattled the cockpit. Lyria yelled, a sound of pure shock. And then she started laughing. Jace collapsed against the back of the seat, laughing with her. The tension, the sexual weight, the fear, the awkwardness snapped like a rubber band, releasing into pure, unadulterated joy. "Did you see that?" Lyria cried, spinning the chair around to face him. Her eyes were shining, her face flushed, her hair a mess. "I blew up a glacier. You missed the center by 3 meters, Jace teased, grinning down at her. "But not bad for a diplomat." Lyria punched his arm playfully. "I am a natural, admit it. You are a menace," Jace said. They stared at each other. The laughter faded, but the smile remained. The cockpit was small, warm from the electronics, and secluded from the rest of the universe. Jace looked at her lips. Lyria looked at his eyes. The sun was setting outside, casting long blue shadows across the ice. "We should go inside," Jace said, his voice barely a whisper. "Before we freeze." Lyria nodded, but she did not move for a long time. That night, the heating unit in the outpost's mess hall sputtered and rattled, fighting a losing battle against the dropping temperature. Jace had pulled a pile of thermal blankets from the storage locker and created a makeshift nest near the heater. The glow of the heating coils cast the room in a soft, orange light. They sat huddled together under the blankets, sharing a tin of heated rations that tasted like salty cardboard. Neither of them cared. "Jace," Lyria said quietly into the silence. "Do you think we can win?" Jace put the ration tin down. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her tighter against his side. She fit there perfectly, as if she had been measured for the space. I do not know, he admitted. The odds are bad. I am scared, Lyria confessed. Not of dying. I am scared that, even if we win, I will have to go back to being who I was, and I do not think I fit in that skin anymore. You do not have to go back, Jace said. You build something new. He turned his head, pressing his forehead against hers. You are not the girl in the glass box anymore. Lyria, you are the woman who blew up a glacier. You are the woman who saved my life. Lyria turned her face, her nose brushing against his. And you? She whispered. Are you still just a weapon? I am whatever you need me to be, Jace said. Lyria shook her head. No, I do not need a guard. I need you, the broken parts, the scars, all of it. She kissed him. It was not the tentative, accidental, almost kiss from the station. It was desperate. It was a collision. Lyria's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him down. Jace's arm tightened around her waist, dragging her into his lap. The kiss tasted of synth rations and fear and an overwhelming, undeniable need. They fell back onto the pile of blankets. The cold of the room vanished, replaced by the heat of their bodies. There was no grace to it, no royal etiquette. It was messy and urgent. Hands fumbled with clasps and zippers. Skin met skin, hot and frantic. When Jace pulled back for air, his forehead resting against hers, he looked terrified. I am going to hurt you, he whispered, the old fear surfacing. I ruin things. Lyria. Lyria reached up, tracing the line of his jaw, her thumb brushing his lip. Then ruin me, she commanded softly. But do not leave me alone. They chose each other in the darkness of that frozen world. It was an act of defiance, against the Empire, against the Council, against the galaxy that wanted them to be enemies or tools. In the tangle of limbs and whispered names, they forged a bond that was stronger than any neural link. It was the choice to be vulnerable in a universe that punished weakness. Jace held her as if she were the only solid thing in the cosmos, and for the first time in his life, the ghosts in his head were silent. The morning light on Voros III was harsh, a blinding white glare that cut through the frosted viewports. Jace woke first. He lay still for a moment, disoriented. Then he felt the weight of Lyria's head on his chest, her arm thrown across his stomach. He froze. Panic spiked for a microsecond, what have I done? Before being washed away by a wave of profound, terrifying protectiveness. He moved his hand, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Lyria stirred. She made a grumpy noise, scrunching her nose up and buried her face deeper into his shirt. Too bright, she mumbled. Turn off the sun. I will get right on that. Your Highness, Jace rasped, his voice rough with sleep. Lyria stiffened. She pushed herself up, blinking blearily. She looked at Jace. Jace looked at her. The awkwardness hit them at the same time. So, Lyria said, pulling the blanket up to her chin. That happened. Jace rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. Yeah, it did. Regrets? Lyria asked, her voice trying to be light but failing. Jace looked at her. He sat up, wincing slightly as his wound pulled, and took her hand. No, he said firmly. No regrets. Lyria smiled, a soft, genuine thing. Good, because if you said yes, I would have had to shoot you with your own gun. I believe you, Jace chuckled. They moved around each other carefully as they got ready, a new gentleness in their interactions. Jace checked her boots to make sure they were sealed. Lyria handed him a nutrient pack and watched him eat it. They were partners now. It was undefined, scary, and fragile, but it was real. They were in the comms room, Jace trying to boost the signal from their shuttle to scan for local patrols. When the main console lit up, A priority transmission, broad spectrum, encrypted with the Imperial seal. Jace froze. Do not answer it. It is on a loop, Lyria said, stepping closer to the screen. It is broadcasting to every system in the sector. She hit the playback key. The holographic image of High Counselor Vane appeared. He looked grave, dressed in mourning black. Citizens of the Empire, Vane began, his voice dripping with solemnity. It is with heavy hearts that we confirm the darkest of treasons. Investigation has revealed that the attacks on our worlds were orchestrated from within. The Princess Lyria, under the influence of radical human separatist factions, has conspired to assassinate her own father and dismantle the council. Lyria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Vane continued. The rogue soldier Jace Corrin, her lover and co-conspirator, has been identified as the butcher of the Othris massacre. To protect the stability of the realm, the Emperor has been placed in protective isolation, effective immediately. The Regency Council assumes emergency executive control. Martial law is declared in all outer sectors. The transmission ended with the seal of the new regime. They framed me, Lyria whispered, staring at the blank screen. They are using me to justify the takeover, and they are using you to make the humans the enemy. Jace stared at the screen, his face hardening into granite. Protective isolation, he repeated. That means they have your father. They are going to put the crown on him. If they do that, Lyria said, her voice shaking with rage, the Empire is gone. It becomes a factory for their war machine. She turned to Jace. We cannot hide here. We cannot run to the border. Jace nodded. He reached out, taking her hand. His grip was iron. We have to go back, he said. To the capital? Lyria asked. It will be a fortress. It is the eye of the storm, Jace said. It is the only place they will not bomb. He looked at her, and the soldier was back in his eyes. But this time, it was tempered by the man who had held her through the night. Are you ready to start a war, Princess? Lyria looked at the screen, then at Jace. She straightened her spine, the fear evaporating into cold determination. No, she said. I am ready to end one. She squeezed his hand. Get the walker. Jace, if they want a monster, let's bring them one. The capital world of Ethelgard was a jewel of impossible geometry. Spires of white crystal and gold alloy pierced the cloud layer, stretching toward the 3 moons that hung in the violet sky. Below the clouds, the city descended into layers of shadow, kilometer-deep canyons of industry, commerce, and forgotten people, all woven together by tubes of hypertrains and rivers of neon light. It was the heart of the Empire, and it was beating with a frantic, terrified rhythm. Jace and Lyria approached not from the sky, but from the rusted veins of the underworld. The Stray had been ditched in an asteroid belt 3 sectors back. They arrived in the belly of a bulk freighter, huddled inside a shipping container marked as industrial scrap. Inside the container, crouched in the dark, was the walker. They had spent the journey painting it. The rusted hull was now coated in a matte black radar-absorbent polymer, but they had added gold filigree and ceremonial banners to its shoulders. It looked like a relic, a piece of history being transported for the parade. We are insane, Jace muttered, checking the walker's diagnostics on his datapad. This is not a plan. This is a suicide note with better formatting. It is a Trojan horse, Lyria corrected, adjusting the heavy veil that covered her face. And it will work because they are arrogant. They expect an attack from a fleet, not from a museum piece. The freighter docked at a private ring used by the Council's logistics division, a location they had pulled from the encrypted files. The area was bustling with activity. Hover barges were offloading crates of fireworks. red banners, and statues of the new Regency Council. Jace, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit and a grease-smeared cap, guided the anti-grav sled carrying the walker out of the container. He kept his head down, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Move it along," a dockmaster shouted, waving a data pad. "The parade starts in 2 hours. That relic needs to be at the Avenue of Kings by noon." Jace nodded, muttering a gruff acknowledgement. He tapped the side of the walker. Inside the cockpit, hidden beneath a thermal blanket, Lyria held her breath. They slipped into the city's arteries, merging with the flow of traffic heading toward the upper spires. As they ascended, the grime of the lower levels gave way to blinding opulence. The Avenue of Kings was a canyon of light. Holographic flowers bloomed in the air, raining petals of soft light onto the crowds. Millions of citizens lined the streets, cheering. Propaganda drones buzzed overhead, playing triumphant, martial music. Order, stability, strength. The words flashed on every screen, interspersed with images of the council members looking benevolent and stern. Jace parked the sled in a staging area behind a massive statue of the first emperor. He helped Lyria slip out of the cockpit. She was dressed in the simple robes of a mid-level priestess, her face completely obscured by the veil. She walked into the crowd. The noise was overwhelming. People were crying, laughing, waving flags. "Thank the stars for the council," a woman next to her said, clutching a child to her hip. "With the emperor sick, who knows what the rebels would have done? They say the princess was working with aliens to sell us out." A man spat. "Ungrateful child." Lyria felt a physical pain in her chest, sharp and cold. They believed it. They swallowed the lie because it made them feel safe. Fear had been weaponized so effectively that the cage looked like a shield. She slipped away, heading for the service entrance of the old library, a towering structure of stone that predated the spires. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of paper and dust. "Lyria," a voice whispered. An old man with skin like parchment stepped from the shadows. It was archivist Hovan, the man who had taught her to read ancient script when she was a girl. Hovan. Lyria breathed, pulling back her veil. The old man's eyes filled with tears. He bowed low, trembling. "I knew it was a lie, Highness. I knew." He led her deeper into the stacks, to a hidden room where others were waiting. There was Kale, a grizzled union leader with cybernetic arms and a face like a topographic map of hard living. And huddled in the corner was Alara, the test subject they had rescued from the gas giant lab. She looked better, cleaner, but her eyes still darted around the room as if expecting a blow. "We are ready," Kale rumbled, his voice like grinding gears. "My boys in the shipyard have jammed the secondary comms. We have a tap on the main broadcast tower, but we can't hold it for long. 5 minutes, tops." "5 minutes is all we need," Jace said, stepping out of the shadows. He had shed the mechanic's jumpsuit, revealing his battered combat armor. He looked out of place among the books, a weapon in a sanctuary. "We seized the tower during the opening speech," Jace outlined, pointing to a holographic map. "I take the team and secure the uplink. Lyria enters the Great Hall." "And then?" Hovan asked, his voice fearful. "And then we tell the truth," Lyria said softly. The room fell silent. The weight of what they were about to do hung heavy in the air. Jace pulled Lyria aside, into a small alcove filled with scrolls. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "Once we start this, there is no extraction plan. If the crowd turns on you—" "I know," Lyria said. "If the council fires on the tower—" "I know, Jace." He looked at her, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. He found none. he found only a terrifying, beautiful resolve. "I am scared," he admitted, which was the bravest thing he had ever said. "I am not," Lyria lied, a small smile touching her lips. "I have never felt more alive. It is strange. I am about to lose everything, and I feel light." Jace reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed the silver markings on her skin. "We met in a bar fight, and we are ending in a revolution," he murmured. "Not bad for a few weeks' work." "I am glad it was you," Lyria whispered. "Even if we burn, I am glad it was you." They held each other for a long moment, breathing in the scent of dust and ozone, two sparks trying to ignite a fire before the dark swallowed them whole. There was one loose end, one ghost Lyria had to face before the end. Using Hovan's access keys, she slipped into the royal gardens, a private sanctuary of bio-sculpted flora behind the palace. She found her father there. The emperor sat on a bench of white marble, staring at a pond of liquid mercury. He looked old, frail. The golden robes of state hung loosely on his frame. "Father," Lyria said softly. The emperor did not startle. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were cloudy, but he recognized her. "Lyria," he sighed. "You should not have come. Vayne will find you." "Did you know?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The labs, the experiments, the order to burn the colonies?" The emperor looked back at the pond. "The empire is vast, child. It is a beast that needs to be fed, to keep the peace. Sacrifices are required." "Sacrifices?" Lyria stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists. "They are putting mind control spikes in people's skulls." "Father, they are planning to put one in yours." "I know," the emperor said. The world stopped. Lyria felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her. "You know?" she whispered. "Better order than chaos," the emperor said, his voice flat, recited. "Better a guided hand than a broken realm. Vayne promised me stability. The regency will ensure the dynasty survives, even if I do not really rule." He looked at her, and for a second a flicker of shame crossed his face. "Go, Lyria, run away. Let history write what it must." He turned his back on her. Lyria stood there, tears streaming down her face. It was not a kidnapping. It was not a coup. It was a surrender. Her father, the man she had idolized, had chosen comfortable slavery over the hard work of ruling. He had sold his daughter and his people for the promise of quiet. She turned and ran. Jace found her 10 minutes later, collapsed on a stone bench near the servants' entrance. Her makeup was smeared, her veil torn. She was sobbing, deep, wrenching sounds that echoed in the alley. "Hey, hey!" Jace dropped to his knees, grabbing her shoulders. "What happened? Did they see you?" He knew. Lyria gasped, choking on the words. He knew. Jace. He let them do it. He chose it. She looked up at him, her eyes wild with grief. "I can't do this. It is all a lie. My blood is poison. I just want to leave. Let's take the ship and go." "Please, Jace. Let's just go." Jace looked at her. He saw the little girl who had been betrayed by her hero. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to grab her, run to the ship, and fly until the stars ran out. But he didn't. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. "No," he said firmly. "Jace, please, no." Jace's voice was hard, cutting through her panic. "Listen to me. If we leave, Hovan dies. Kyle dies. Ilara goes back to a cage. Those people in the street cheering for their own chains, they stay slaves forever." He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, his touch rough but gentle. "Your father gave up. He is a coward. But you are not him. You are the woman who walked into a firefight with a shock caster. You are the woman who looked into my head and didn't run away. He pulled her forehead against his. You are the queen they need. Lyria. Not because of your blood, but because you are the only one willing to bleed for them. Lyria took a shuddering breath. She closed her eyes, leaning into his strength. She felt the beat of his heart against her chest, steady, rhythmic, real. She opened her eyes. The grief was still there, but the panic was gone, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard anger. "Fix my veil," she whispered. Jace smiled, a grim, dangerous expression. With pleasure. The great hall of the palace was a cavern of gold. Banners hung from the ceiling, hundreds of feet long. The air was thick with incense and the hum of anti-grav cameras. Thousands of dignitaries stood in tiered rows. In the center, on a raised dais, sat the Regency Council. Vane stood at the podium, looking benevolent and triumphant. Behind him, the Emperor sat on his throne, his eyes vacant, a new heavy crown resting on his brow. Today marks a new dawn. Vane's voice boomed, amplified to reach every corner of the planet, a dawn of security, of unity. Outside, in the shadow of the broadcast tower, Jace sat in the cockpit of the Walker. "Now!" he yelled into the comms. Kale and his Union crew blew the charges on the tower's security doors. Jace slammed the Walker's throttles forward. The disguised war machine erupted from its hiding spot. It smashed through a decorative archway, shedding its ceremonial banners like a snake shedding skin. The gold filigree tore away, revealing the matte black armor and the very real rotary cannon. Panic erupted in the streets. Jace ignored the screaming crowds. He pushed the Walker toward the tower, its massive feet crushing the gilded pavement. Security drones swarmed him. "Not today," Jace growled. He spun the torso, the rotary cannon spooling up. "Bert!" A line of tracers cut the sky, shredding the drones into sparking confetti. Kale's team stormed the control room. "I'm hacking the uplink," Kale shouted over the comms. "Give me 30 seconds, inside the Great Hall." The doors boomed. The crowd gasped. Vane stopped speaking, looking annoyed. The doors opened. Lyria walked in. She was alone. She wore no armor, no weapon, just her torn priestess robes. She walked down the long red carpet, her head high. The silence was absolute. "Guards!" Vane barked, his composure slipping. "Seize her!" The royal guards stepped forward, spears leveled. Lyria stopped. She reached up and pulled the veil from her face. "Stand down," she commanded. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a thunderclap. The guards hesitated. They knew that face. They knew that voice. Vane pointed a shaking finger. "She is a traitor. Kill her! Kale!" Jace roared over the link. "Now!" Kale smashed the enter key. The broadcast signal hijacked every screen in the Empire. The image of Vane's face was replaced by Lyria standing alone in the hall. Lyria raised her hand. She was holding the data core. "This is the truth," she said. She activated the holo. The air above the hall filled with images. The burning colony. The experiments on the soldiers. The document signed by Vane authorizing the assassination of the Duke. The secret order to drug the Emperor. The crowd in the hall gasped. A murmur of horror rippled through the galaxy. Vane's face went white. "Cut the feed!" he screamed, but Lyria was not done. She reached into her robe and pulled out the Neuralink headset. She put it on. Jace, in the cockpit of the Walker, fighting off a squad of heavy troopers, put his headset on too. "Ready?" he asked, his voice strained as the Walker took a missile hit to the shoulder. "Together," Lyria whispered. She activated the link. She did not just show them files. She showed them her. She pushed her memories into the broadcast stream. Billions of people suddenly felt the cold terror of the assassination attempt. They felt the shame of her father's betrayal. They felt the horror of the lab, the smell of the blood, the sound of the screams. And then Jace joined in. They felt the mud of the trenches, the agony of the colony burning, the crushing guilt of a soldier ordered to commit murder. It was raw. It was unedited. It was a violation of every boundary of privacy. A global empathy bomb. In the hall, people fell to their knees, weeping. Guards lowered their weapons, shaking. They didn't just see the crimes, they felt them. They felt the fear of the victims. They felt the arrogance of the oppressors. The connection between Jace and Lyria was the anchor. Through the horror, the galaxy felt their love, not a fairy tale romance, but a desperate, gritty, survivalist bond. They felt Lyria's trust in Jace. They felt Jace's devotion to her. It was a beacon of humanity in a sea of political rot. Vane fell back against the podium, clutching his chest. He looked out at the crowd and saw not subjects, but a tide of awakening rage. "Stop it!" he shrieked. "It's a trick. It's mind control." But no one was listening. The council members began to run, scrambling toward the rear exits. Jace, watching the feed from his cockpit, saw the guards turning on their officers. He saw the crowd in the streets outside tearing down the Regency banners. "It's working," he breathed, blood trickling from his nose from the intensity of the link. But Vane was not done. He pulled a remote from his pocket. "If I cannot rule it," he snarled, looking at Lyria, "I will break it." He thumbed a switch. The crown on the Emperor's head lit up with a harsh red light. The Emperor screamed. It was a sound of pure agony. Lyria ripped the headset off. "Father!" Vane laughed, a manic sound. "The override command. The fleet will receive the order to glass the capital in 2 minutes. Burn it all." "Jace!" Lyria yelled into her comms. "The crown! It's transmitting a kill signal. I see it." Jace shouted. He shoved the walker's throttles to the stops. The massive machine surged forward, then it smashed through the front wall of the Great Hall, showering the dignitaries with debris. The walker stood there, a black giant amidst the gold, its rotary cannons smoking. Jace targeted the podium where Vane stood. "You are dismissed." Jace growled. He fired. The podium disintegrated. Vane disappeared in a cloud of dust and masonry. But the crown was still glowing. The Emperor was convulsing on the throne. Lyria sprinted up the dais. She grabbed the crown. It was hot, searing her hands. "Jace, I can't get it off. It's fused." Jace looked at his sensors. The fleet was powering weapons. "Use the link," Jace yelled. "Overload it. Push everything we have into it." Lyria put the headset back on. Jace gritted his teeth. They didn't push memories this time. They pushed power. They pushed every ounce of their will, their rage, their love, channeling it through the link and into the crown's receiver. The crown whined, the red light turning blinding white. Lyria screamed. Jace roared. The feedback loop shattered the crown. It exploded in a shower of sparks and metal shards. The Emperor slumped forward, unconscious but alive. The red light faded. Outside, the fleet powered down. Silence fell over the Great Hall. Lyria stood panting. Her hands burned, her robes smoking. The walker stood behind her, steam hissing from its vents. She looked out at the galaxy. She looked at the camera drone hovering in front of her face. "The Regency is dissolved," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "The lying is over." She looked back at the walker. The cockpit canopy hissed open. Jace climbed out, battered, bleeding, but standing tall. He looked at her. She looked at him. And in front of 1 billion witnesses, the princess and the veteran smiled at each other. It was the smile of 2 people who had walked through hell and come out holding hands. The explosion that vaporized High Counselor Vane did not end the war. It only shattered the illusion of order. The Great Hall, once a sanctuary of golden silence, had become a cauldron of noise. The dust from the destroyed podium hung in the air like a thick, gray curtain. Through the haze, the screaming began. It was not just fear. It was the sound of a society tearing itself apart at the seams. On the floor of the hall, the Royal Guard was fracturing. A captain threw down his helmet, his face twisted in horror at the images Lyria had broadcast. He turned his spear against a lieutenant who was still shouting orders to kill the traitor princess. Blaster fire erupted at point-blank range, turning the velvet-lined aisles into kill zones. Outside, in the plaza, the chaos was magnified 1,000 times. The citizens of Ethelgard, who had spent generations in a drug-induced slumber of contentment, were waking up. They had felt the pain of the tortured soldiers through Lyria's neural link. They had felt the cold, calculating malice of their leaders. The mob surged against the barricades. Some were fleeing, trampling over fallen banners. Others were fighting, tearing at the armored troopers with their bare hands, fueled by a collective psychic rage. In the center of the storm stood the Walker. Jace sat in the cockpit, sweat stinging his eyes. The neural link was still active, humming at the base of his skull. It was no longer the overwhelming flood it had been during the broadcast. Now, it was a tactical web, a second skin of sensory input. He could feel Lyria inside the hall. He could feel her heartbeat hammering against his own ribs, her fear controlled by an iron will. She was not running. She was standing her ground near the throne, protecting her unconscious father. Jace. Her thought echoed in his mind, clearer than any radio transmission. They are regrouping near the east wing. Harlan is still active. I see them, Jace thought back, swinging the Walker's torso. I am cutting off their extraction route. He pushed the control sticks forward. The massive machine lurched, stepping over the wreckage of a limousine. But before he could reach the east wing, a shadow fell over him. From the smoke of the burning administrative block, a figure emerged. It was a soldier, but only in the loosest definition of the word. He stood 7 feet tall, encased in black, heavy impact armor that looked fused to his body. One arm was a rotary cannon. The other held a vibro blade the size of a man. This was Unit 0, the Council's answer to the problem of free will. Jace froze. He knew the specs of this unit. He had seen the blueprints in the stolen data. 0 was what happened when you took a veteran, stripped out the memories, stripped out the conscience, and left only the killer. It was looking in a mirror. Jace? Lyria's voice in his head was sharp with worry. Your heart rate just spiked. I have a problem, Jace replied tightly. Unit 0 did not hesitate. It charged. The impact shook the ground. 0 slammed into the Walker's legs, the vibro blade screeching as it carved a deep furrow into the shin armor. Jace roared, stomping the pedal. The Walker kicked out, a multi-ton blow that would have pulverized a tank. 0 took the hit, skidded back 10 meters, and immediately fired its cannon. Explosions walked up the front of Jace's cockpit. The canopy cracked. Warning lights bathed Jace in red. He is faster than the machine, Jace realized. He is faster because he does not care if he survives. 0 leaped, using jump jets to vault onto the Walker's hull. He began tearing at the hydraulic lines of the main gun with his mechanical claw. Inside the hall, Lyria felt Jace's panic. It hit her like a physical blow, staggering her. She grabbed the edge of the dais to steady herself. She looked up. Across the chaotic floor, surrounded by a ring of loyalist elites, stood Counselor Harlan. He was an old man, elegant and cruel. the mentor who had taught Lyria politics while signing death warrants for colonies. He was not running. He was watching her. "Lyria," he called out, his voice amplified by a collar mic. He stepped over the body of a dead guard without looking down. "You have made a magnificent mess, child." Lyria stepped down from the dais. The data core was still clutched in her hand, but she let it drop. The truth was out. Now came the reckoning. "I showed them who you are." "Harlan," she said, her voice cutting through the din. "You showed them chaos," Harlan shouted back, his composure cracking. "You think this is freedom? Look around you. People dying in the streets, brother killing brother. This is what we saved them from." "You did not save them," Lyria countered, walking toward him. "You paralyzed them. You turned an empire into a farm, and you think love will save it?" Harlan sneered. He gestured to the carnage. "That soldier of yours outside, do you feel him dying? Do you feel his terror? That is what love gets you. Lyria, weakness, hesitation. If you had taken the crown, you could have ordered peace. Instead, you chose to feel." Lyria stopped 10 paces from him. She closed her eyes. She reached out through the link. She felt Jace. He was trapped in the cockpit, the canopy buckling under Zero's assault. He was bleeding again. He was terrified. But beneath the terror, there was no hesitation. There was a fierce, burning drive to keep breathing because she was still breathing. "Jace," she thought, pouring every ounce of her belief into the connection. "You are not him. You are not a machine. You are the man who fixed my drones. You are the man who laughed at the fire slug." In the cockpit, Jace gasped. The panic receded, replaced by a clarity that was cold and sharp. Zero was tearing at the hatch. Jace looked at the controls. He looked at the manual override for the ejection system. "I am not a weapon," Jace whispered. He didn't fire the guns. He didn't try to outmuscle the cyborg. He opened the hatch. Zero, expecting resistance, lurched forward as the canopy flew off. Jace unbuckled and launched himself out of the seat, grabbing the manual fire extinguisher canister mounted on the wall. As Zero lunged into the cockpit to kill the pilot who wasn't there. Jace swung. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the sensor array on Zero's head. He smashed the canister into the cyborg's optics. Zero flailed, blind. Jace landed on the walker's hull, slipped on the hydraulic fluid, and scrambled to the external release for the ammo drum. "Eat this," Jace grunted. He pulled the lever. The massive drum of explosive rounds disconnected. It slid off the rack, pinning Zero's arm to the walker's chassis. Jace rolled off the machine, hitting the pavement hard, just as Zero tried to fire his cannon to free himself. The spark ignited the ammo drum. Boom! The explosion blew the top off the walker. Unit 0 was vaporized in a column of fire. Jace lay on his back, staring at the smoke. He was alive. "Jace, I am here," Jace sent back, the thought laced with pain and relief. "I am here. Lyria, inside the hall." Lyria opened her eyes. She smiled. It was a terrifying smile. He won. "Harlan," she said softly, because he had something to lose. Harlan's face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "Then lose everything." He spat. He reached into his robe and pulled out a frantic-looking device. It wasn't a weapon. It was a remote override for the palace's architectural systems. "The crown was destroyed," Harlan shouted, backing away. "But the emitters are in the walls, in the floor. If I cannot control their minds, I will burn them out." He slammed his thumb onto the activation stud. A high-pitched whine filled the hall. The gold inlay on the walls began to glow with a sickly violet light. People in the hall clutched their heads, screaming. The sound wasn't auditory. It was a neural feedback loop designed to scramble the synaptic pathways of anyone not wearing a dampener. Lyria fell to her knees, her vision whitening. It felt like a hot needle was being driven into her frontal lobe. "Jace!" she screamed mentally. Outside, Jace felt the spike of agony. He staggered up, looking at the palace. The building itself was vibrating. He saw the external power conduits running up the side of the Great Hall. They were glowing. The conduits. Lyria projected the image from her mind to his. The north wall. Cut the power. Jace looked at his pistol, but it was empty. The walker was a burning wreck. He looked around. A fallen statue of a Regency general lay nearby. It was holding a massive ceremonial spear made of conductive alloy. Jace ran. He grabbed the spear. It weighed 80 pounds, but adrenaline made it feel like a twig. He sprinted toward the exposed power junction on the palace wall. Inside, Lyria was crawling across the floor. Harlan was laughing, standing in the center of a dampening field, watching the nobility writhe in agony. Lyria forced herself to stand. Her nose was bleeding. Her brain felt like it was boiling. She tackled Harlan. They fell together. Harlan was old, but he was desperate. He struck her, a backhand that split her lip. "You stupid girl," he shrieked. "You ruined everything." Lyria grabbed his wrist, the wrist holding the remote. "Now! Jace!" Jace, outside, roared and drove the metal spear into the power junction. Thousands of volts of electricity arced through the spear. It hit Jace. It threw him backward 10 feet, his body convulsing. But the surge traveled up the line. The lights in the Great Hall exploded. The violet glow vanished. The whining noise cut out instantly. Harlan stared at the dead remote in his hand. Lyria, panting, wiped the blood from her mouth. "It is over," she whispered. She stood up. Around her, the guards were getting to their feet, shaking off the pain. They looked at Harlan. There was no loyalty left in their eyes, only retribution. Harlan looked at the guards. He looked at Lyria. He dropped the remote. "I only wanted order," he whispered. "Take him," Lyria said, turning away. She ran for the exit. She ran past the cheering crowds, past the burning banners. She found Jace lying in the rubble near the power junction. His armor was scorched black. His hair was singed. "Jace!" She dropped beside him, her hands hovering over his chest, terrified to touch him. Jace opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, but they were clear. "Did we win?" he croaked, smoke curling from his lips. Lyria laughed, a sob catching in her throat. She kissed his soot-stained forehead. "We won," she said. "You idiot. You wonderful, reckless idiot. The days that followed were not the stuff of fairy tales. There were no parades, only funerals and firefights. The capital remained a war zone for weeks. Loyalist pockets held out in the upper spires, while riots burned in the lower levels. The food supply chain collapsed. The banking system froze. Lyria did not sleep. She moved from the war room to the refugee centers, still wearing her torn robes, organizing relief efforts. She was the only authority anyone trusted, but the weight of it was crushing her. Factions began to form. The military high command wanted to declare martial law to restore order. The trade guilds wanted Lyria to declare herself Empress Supreme to stabilize the currency. "Do it, Highness," a general urged her one evening, slamming his hand on the map table. "Take the throne. Issue the decree. The people want a savior. Give them one." Lyria looked at the map. It would be so easy. One signature, one speech. She could force them to stop fighting. She could mandate peace. She walked out onto the balcony, looking over the smoking city. The temptation was a physical ache. She was so tired. Jace was there, leaning against the railing. He had his arm in a sling, and he looked as exhausted as she felt. "They are right, you know," he said quietly. "You could fix this by midnight." Lyria gripped the railing. Is that what you think I should do? Jace looked at her. He didn't blink. If you sign that decree, he said, his voice flat, I am leaving. Lyria spun around. What? I fought for a woman who wanted to break the wheel, Jace said. Not for a woman who wants to steer it. If you take that crown, even for the right reasons, you are just Harlan with a prettier face. And I will not love another tyrant. The words hit her like a slap. How dare you, she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. Do you have any idea how heavy this is? I am holding a collapsing star. Jace, if I let go, everyone burns. Then let them build their own fire, Jace shouted back. You are scared. Lyria, you are scared that without the power, you are nothing. You are scared that if you ask them instead of telling them, they will say no. Yes. I am scared, Lyria screamed, breaking down. I have never been anything but a symbol. I do not know how to be a person, and I do not know how to be anything but a weapon. Jace stepped closer, his voice cracking. Every time I look at my hands, I see blood. I am terrified that I am going to hurt you, that I am poison. They stood there, breathing hard, stripped bare. The neural link hummed, carrying the truth of their words deeper than sound. Jace reached out with his good hand. He took hers. We are both broken, he whispered, but we do not have to be rulers. We just have to be first. The first to let go. Lyria looked at him. She looked at the city below. She took a deep breath. She squeezed his hand. Okay, she said. We let go. The next morning, Lyria stood before the assembly. She did not sit on the throne. She stood on the floor level. She announced the dissolution of the regency. She announced the formation of a provisional council, drawn from every sector, nobles, workers, soldiers, scientists. I will not rule you, she told the stunned silence. I will serve with you, and when the Constitution is written, I will step down. It was chaotic, it was messy, it was imperfect, but it was free. 6 months later, the snow on Ethelgard was white again, no longer gray with ash. The statue of the first emperor in the plaza had been melted down. In its place stood a wall of black stone, etched with the names of the victims of the experiments and the colony wars. Jace walked through the plaza. He walked with a cane now. The nerve damage from the lightning was permanent, but he stood straighter than he ever had. He spent his days at the new Veterans Center, a place he had helped build. He sat with men and women who woke up screaming, and he told them that they were not monsters. He told them that survival was not a sin. He found Lyria in the palace gardens. She was wearing simple trousers and a tunic, her hands covered in soil. She was replanting the flowers that had been trampled during the coup. Hey, Jace called out. Lyria looked up, wiping a smudge of dirt from her nose. She smiled. It was a soft smile, lacking the sharp edges of the court. You are late, she said. I was busy, Jace said, limping over. I had a debate with a mechanic about the torque specs on a prosthetic arm. I won. Lyria laughed. She stood up, brushing off her knees. Are you hungry? I was thinking about lunch. Jace made a face. As long as it is not fire slug. They walked back toward the palace, bickering gently about whether to eat inside or on the terrace. The neural link between them was a low, warm hum, a constant presence of shared contentment. It wasn't intrusive anymore. It was just the feeling of never being truly alone. Come with me, Lyria said suddenly, pulling him toward the hangar bays. Where are we going? You will see. She led him to the refurbished Museum of Imperial History. It was empty this late in the day. In the center of the main hall, polished and repaired, stood the Walker, the Iron Witch, It had been deactivated, its weapons stripped. It was a monument now, not a machine of war. Lyria climbed up the maintenance ladder. "What are you doing?" Jace asked, leaning on his cane. "Come up here," she called down. Jace sighed, but he climbed. Lyria was sitting in the cockpit. The canopy was open. She was sitting in the gunner's seat, her legs swinging. She looked at him. Her eyes danced with mischief. She patted the wide leather seat beside her thigh. "It is big," she said, fighting back a grin. "Sit here." Jace froze. He looked at the seat. He looked at her. The memory of the frozen outpost washed over them, the fear, the desperate lust, the moment they decided to trust each other. He threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, booming sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He climbed into the cockpit. He didn't sit behind her this time. He squeezed in next to her, ignoring the lack of space. "You are impossible," he said, wrapping his arm around her. "And you are stuck with me," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. They sat there for a long time, watching the dust motes dance in the light, two retired warriors in a sleeping dragon. The final scene took place on the orbital platform, high above the capital. The view was spectacular. The curve of the planet was a blue arc against the stars. Below them, the docks were busy, but there were no dreadnoughts, no black warships. The ships leaving the docks were painted white and orange. They were medical transports, engineering vessels, terraformers. They were heading out to the border worlds, not to conquer, but to rebuild. Jace and Lyria stood by the viewport, hand in hand. "We did that," Lyria whispered, watching a transport engage its thrusters. "No," Jace said softly. "They did that. We just gave them the chance." He looked at her. The silver markings on her skin caught the starlight. She looked older, tired, and absolutely radiant. Lyria turned to him. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She squeezed his hand, and through the link, she sent a pulse. It wasn't a memory, and it wasn't an image. It was a feeling. It was the feeling of waking up from a nightmare and realizing the sun is shining. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted. It was gratitude. Simple, profound, wordless gratitude. "Thank you," she thought, "for showing me the gunner's chair." "Thank you," Jace thought back, "for showing me I could leave it." They turned back to the window, watching the ships scatter like seeds into the dark, carrying the promise of a better harvest. The galaxy was vast and dangerous and full of scars, but as they stood there, two small figures against the infinite night, they knew the truth. The systems could be broken, the wars could end. All it took was the courage to sit down, take a hand, and choose to be human.